As we have gotten to this point in the personnel season, in our off season, I was kind of sitting back to think about where we are. And before I get to the personnel process, I want to talk about how this has been in my transition in a sense. When I was younger, I never saw myself as a leader. The examples that I always had in my life, they weren't like me. The coaches, things like that were kind of, didn't have the same vibe or energy that I had. I consider myself to be a positive, joyful, humble person. And, I never really saw that. So, in a sense, even as I rose in my career, until I saw examples that were a little bit more like me, I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to lead. And so, I wanted to first start off by thanking this organization for allowing me to lead in the way that I can lead in a genuine way. That's not easy. It's not the same as everybody else. It's a unique style, but I'm appreciative that everybody here has accepted me in that way. We always talk about diversity being an important thing. And as I sit back and think about that, I see it even more important. Just there might be a younger person in this organization who sees me and maybe won't be like me and sees, hey, I can be myself, I can lead in a different way, and there's many different ways to lead. So I just want to start off by saying that. As we've gone deeper in this personnel process, every day, being next to Kevin is incredible. I said in my opening press conference, you'd want to work with the coach you would work for, and what I meant by that was you want to be with the coach who understands personnel. This beautiful puzzle we keep talking about in team building. It's really hard to find solutions if you don't have somebody on the side of you who really understands the stuff at a high level. And he, day in and day out, shows that to me, and it's been incredible to continue that relationship. Our personnel staff has been incredible. I like to start off by thanking a lot of them. They've worked night and day, endless time away from their families and things like that. So I think they deserve a spot here. A lot of times Kevin and I will get up here and get a chance to smile and be nice to you great people, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes who run the machine, and I want to make sure they get their credit and when it's time. First, let's start off with RG, somebody who came over with me from Cleveland. He's been working night and day with us here. My inbox, my text, it's filled with ideas, thoughts, advice, wisdom, and so appreciative to have him alongside Jamal and Ryan, who were leaders during the transition and have helped me hit the ground running. So gracious to them and their hard work and all they've done in this organization. And I first want to start off by saying that this group, this whole personnel group, is incredibly humble, tight knit, detailed, passionate, and I think that's a credit to the leadership that was here before me, and I want to make sure I mention that. Then you move on to somebody like Chisholm, who I've known for a really long time, and he's a friend, but he's somebody I've always been impressed with, and seeing him up close, you see a humble spirit and somebody who is so unbelievably powerful when he speaks, and just being up close, so it's been incredible to see. Shali, who, as a college director, he's not only dealing with his first draft in this process, but also welcoming a new GM. Think about how difficult that's got to be for him. I think there was a couple wide-eyed looks at both of us. Him, I'm, being, a little surprised by me, and, me kind of seeing all the details that go on behind the scenes that, frankly, I wasn't aware of before I got to this seat. He's been instrumental, and we wouldn't be here without him. Pat, Frankie, Gus, great, just unbelievable. I've leaned on their experience so incredibly much. We've got, Blaine, Jake, Caroline, who, they're younger scouts, but they are on the rise. They are so powerful, and they've thrived in this environment. We've got, RJ, Mitch, Alex, Taylor. Again, as a young person, it's hard when you're in a big room full of people. But whenever they've had the stage, they've answered it, and it's been cool to see from my part. We have Kevin McCabe, who hasn't been able to be here with us, but his impact is still felt, and we're really appreciative of that. Last year when I was on the GM interview circuit, I think that some of the feedback was that I needed to go on the road. And at the time it was said, I didn't really understand why. And then having gone on the road, I did a West Coast trip this year. I understood why in that moment, because I think at the end of the day, to be able to lead, you have to have empathy. And I went on a school visit. I sat in my little cubicle. I'm not in my desk in my perfect environment. I'm looking at different things, and I'm trying to talk to coaches and support staff and get this information. And it just hits you how hard that job is. It is unbelievably difficult. And, that's an empathy and a kind of a wisdom that I wish I had, honestly, in my earlier career. I remember texting my old buddies at the 49ers being like, God, I don't even know how you guys do this, and so those moments are always great, obviously, and so having that experience allows me to help be there with them and lead them in this way now. I don't want to leave out our pro scouts who are incredible because they've honestly set the table for us to be where we are right now. I think in a good position heading into this draft. So Chris and Reed just did an incredible job. They're a part of our college process as well, and we're excited to everything they do for us. Rob Brzezinski, he's awesome. Kevin and I have just been this great team. We have a nickname for each other. We won't share it here, but he's been awesome and really just so thankful for him. Emily, who helps Rob and I so incredibly much. Luke and Mike, who help run our meetings, help all the data on the back end. As you know, I'm a data person. I can be a little demanding in that space. Our analytics guys, Scott Kuhn, Rex Johnson, Chris French. So picture, if you're a position coach working for a head coach who came up doing that position coach, right? So that's what that job is like for them now. Everybody says they want to work for an analytics-friendly GM until he gets there. But those guys have answered the bell. They've pushed me when I needed to be pushed. They've been incredible. And so thankful to them and everybody else in this organization for all they do. Moving on to Kevin and his staff, who've been an integral part of our personnel process, it's, they've been on double duty. Now the players are back in the building, and so we're asking them to carry a pretty heavy load, and, they've answered the bell. We were doing a draft exercise yesterday, and I only want to tell this story because I think it's, illustrative of what we're building here. And, Coach McCardle raises his hand, and we're at a certain pick, and he gives this impassioned plea to pick a different position than his. And there are some great options that are there at his position. And there's no words that needed to be said. Everybody felt the moment. And when you talk about selflessness and team and all those things in that moment, he showed everybody what it was about. And, that's the vibe that was in that room at that place. And I'm excited. I told them at the end of that meeting, we can't control what happens this weekend. All we can do is prepare like crazy and move as a unit, move together. Look, and I don't know what's going to happen at the draft, but we have a lot of scenarios planned for, and, we will best respond to whatever comes our way. With that, I'll take questions.
Kwesi, how much of a feel do you have for what the 11 teams ahead of you are going to do, the 11 choices ahead of you, or is it just kind of all over the place in your estimation?
Sure. You try and get a sense, and you talk to you guys are an incredible source of information when it comes to that. Ultimately, first and foremost, your first job is, if you're picking 12, make sure there's 12 names that can come out of your mouth. So that's the first where you start your discussions, and then at that point you start asking yourself, well, if it's this person versus this other thing, what would you do? And so really, I'm not worried so much about specifically what's going to be done in front of us, but what situation will be presented to us, and what's our way to best respond from there.
Kwesi, a lot of the draft discourse has been that this draft isn't quite as deep with first-round talent, or that the top-end talent maybe isn't what it is in some other years. How do you look at, kind of that batch of first-round players?
I try not. We are in the prognosticating business, but I don't ever want to sell short any professional athlete and what they're going to do eventually in their career. Again, ultimately, it's up to each team to decide their value for their pick and move from there. I think there's some incredible players at the top of this draft, and ultimately that the history will bear that out in the future. But I don't want to speak too much to that. But ultimately, our job is to do what we can, make sure that we get the value for the pick. There is a benchmark. There's a historical benchmark to the value of a certain pick, and we're trying to meet it in however way we can.
Kwesi, what do you think your signature will be when this draft is over? Everybody's going to say, you went for this kind of player, or this is what you kind of draft you had.
Well, I hope they don't say it's my signature about anything. It's our signature. When you sit in a room with Kevin, he always kind of winces when you say I or me, and that's kind of what we're building here. This is about we. I'm not going to do anything for the sake of me or any type of perception I want out there in the public. We're going to do what's best for this organization. We have a time horizon that we're planning for, and we have our needs in front. We're just going to try and address those as best we can.
What was your role last year or the last few years during the draft, and what did you learn?
Yeah, in Cleveland, Andrew Berry is one of the most thorough people you ever be around. So the draft itself was pretty boring. We planned for a lot of scenarios, and so we had a plan, and ultimately we executed it. But my job last year was to be on the phone, communicating with different teams, kind of letting them know where we're thinking and trying to get information from them, what they're thinking, and see if there's any mutual deals that can come into place. We ended up trading up for JOK, so that was something that I was involved in. But on draft day, honestly, if you prepare for the game, the game shouldn't be too stressful. So I don't perceive a draft room with people running around and being super frenetic. But I learned, honestly, and I've always known this, but seeing it up close with Andrew, if you prepare, the game doesn't have to be stressful or fast moving. You can just take care of your scenarios in advance and be prepared. And there's always going to be surprises. I'm not going to sit here and say that you can plan this perfect thing, but you can be as detailed and prepared as you can. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you don't regret anything you do. You want to minimize regret. That is one of the chief things you're trying to do, and we'll make sure we do that.
As you kind of feel out the possible scenarios here, have you made or fielded a lot of calls about your pick at number 12?
Sure. We're always calling teams and getting their thoughts and, hey, we might be thinking about this, if this. It's a big nested if loop thing we got going on, and every GM's involved, and we've had some great conversations. They've had some great conversations with us. Ultimately, we're ready to do whatever is presented to us. If you stand and pick at 12, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it the best that we can for this organization. And if it's not that, we'll do something different.
There seems to be a lot of talk just about teams wanting to trade back in this draft. I mean, do you share that kind of notion?
Again, I can't speak for the teams in front of us per se. I can't speak for them, but I think ultimately the draft is an auction, right? So all we can do is talk. We can talk at length about this, but all it takes is one person to see that value. So all these things that happen beforehand and all these things that get said, there is somebody sitting in a building right now who thinks that player is going to be the next great player. That person might want to trade up for that player, and ultimately we'll find that out on Thursday or Friday or Saturday, whenever it happens, and we'll be ready for it when it does.
As you're putting the draft board together, what types of things have you wanted to emphasize in terms of how you're stacking players?
Sure. I think our environment, I wanted to be really collaborative. Ultimately, I try to explain to them that our draft room is like a real-life algorithm. Essentially, algorithms combine different information sources into some final output. And so I wanted our draft room to be essentially that, a lot of different voices that came together. And then ultimately, on the end of that, here's a number, here's a recommendation that says how confident this room of different sources is and what we're about to do. So that's really what I've tried to focus on, make sure that we're being intentional and detailed about what we do and say. I think a lot of times with information, you get too much of it, and that can distract you from the main thing. A lot of times my job is to just center us on, hey, okay, I'm that information is great, but how does it impact these core questions that we're interested in answering?
How important is it in this draft to, at some point, come away with a cornerback that could compete for a starting job as a rookie?
There's lots of positions on a football field. I think the great thing about football is it's interconnected, and it's our job to be the team with more points than the other team at the end of the game 17 times, and then hopefully you get in the dance and you do it a few more times, and hopefully you do it that last time. So, we have every team has needs. But ultimately, our job is to build a team that's going to, give us our best chance to be the last one standing, and there's different ways to do that.
Well, what do you think of the cornerback depth in draft?
It's the draft, right? There's somebody that I sat in a dark room that I see better value than anybody else in the NFL, and hopefully that person will be there at the right particular value.
What's your feeling about volume and quantity of draft picks? You mentioned analytics earlier. I know that's a topic that's discussed often. It's just the sort of the crapshoot nature of the draft, and sometimes quantity, there's a value in just having quantity. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are there and where you fall.
No question. I think in the NFL, it's sort of like somewhere between the NBA dynamic where special players do matter, but you've got a big team, and you've got depth needed, and you've got things that you've got to fill out. So I think volume is really important. Now, I would push that, whatever chart anybody's using, there's no amount of seventh-round picks that will equal the value of the first pick, right? You could do that 1,000 7th-round picks, and that's not going to equal the value, right? Because there's a specialness that comes to that first-round pick that isn't replaceable very easily. And so those are the things you kind of got to go back and forth and think of in your mind. It's not a simple math equation. I love these conversations now as a GM because I used to be one of the people building those charts, and I kind of laugh with people. It's like, yeah, I don't. There's no. Let's just talk about this in a kind of, use those as a backboard, but like let's talk about this and kind of understanding the dynamics that go forth.
When you were at the combine, Kwesi, what was your MO in terms of when you'd sit down with the player? What did you want to know about them that you thought would or would not qualify them as being a Viking?
First of all, we want to make sure that we use that data point in its contextual importance, right? So our area scouts and road scouts and national scouts, they've been scouting these guys for 2, 3, 4 years. And so that's a lot of information, a lot of anecdotal information from their coaches, strength coaches, and things like that. So I want to make sure that first and foremost, we're not overweighting a 20-minute session where they've maybe been 15 before us and they're 21, 22-year-old kids and they might be a little fatigued, and make sure that they might not be their best version of themselves. So I want to make sure we're weighting the importance of it. But after that, it's really just trying to see what's their why, what drives them. Are they going to be able to operate in a professional environment? Do they have what's in them, or the want to, the desire to become the greatest player they can be? We're trying to put a building together where everybody's going to be the best version of themselves. And are they going to fit in that culture? Those are really the main things we're focused on, but we're not trying to do too much with an interview like the combine.
When it comes to the surprises, like you said, you can go and packed with all this information. Somewhere between the algorithm and organic is where the draft happens sometimes. How do you personally handle that? And I know it's not just you, so it's a group. And so how do you think that dynamic will go in that area?
Options. Give yourself options. I started this season by telling our personnel staff, our coaches, if you give us options, we become dangerous. But if you tell me there's only one player that we like, well, then there's nothing I can do. That's all of a sudden where you get certain things where you become backed in a corner. And so that has been our theme this offseason. And again, I think we're there. I think we're in a good place. I think our whole room is united in understanding why that's important. And so, again, we'll see what happens this weekend.
Kwesi, how do you measure risk-reward? Maybe a guy had a character issue or an injury issue. Would you consider yourself a risk taker in the draft, or are you more conservative?
Again, I guess these are things that we'll learn, but again, it's not me; it's the organization. It's the we. First I want to say that word character always gets thrown out so often. I always want to be specific. You're talking about human beings, 21, 22 years old. We were not perfect when we come out. I know I wasn't perfect coming out as a 21-year-old, far from it. And so back to the original question that got asked earlier, we're just trying to figure out if they can operate in a professional environment and they're going to be what they try to be the best they can be as an NFL player, and then also represent the organization well. That looks different, right? There's a lot of different past histories that will end up being, if you look in our building, there's probably a lot of past histories that end up being the players that they are today. So I wanted to first start off by saying that. But the risk reward, in general, to your point, it's not an exact science, but it is something that you pay attention to. If there's a certain value for a player, yeah, there's got to be a discount for certain things like injury risk or things like that, but it's not this perfect, hey, it's 10% here or it's 5% here, it's a round of discount. It is kind of an imperfect science, a little bit art, a little bit of math together, and I think that's where we thrive.
You mentioned to Andrew Berry, there was a stat this week that he's been an outlier far and away drafting the youngest draft classes. How much of an emphasis do you put on drafting younger players to give them extra time to develop?
So when we do these studies, you're looking for information variables, and you're always asking yourself, all else being equal, does this variable correlate to success? And so if I had a player of equal ability and equal this and equal that, would I want the younger player? And those are things that people can disagree on or agree on, and I don't want to speak for AB and exactly what was in his mind, but there's also dynamics that come with a younger roster, right? So you're dealing with things that maybe you wouldn't deal with older players. So it's not this perfect equation, and I don't think Andrew looks at it like that, but it is something where clearly he considers it an important factor, and ultimately it's again, we consider all this information together, and it impacts our decisions, but I won't say it's something that we're stressing or trying to do.
We talk about equal ability. What inputs are you putting more emphasis on than others when you're trying to figure out equal ability? You've got scouts obviously coming at it from one perspective,
Yep.
and coaches, data, all these different things. What's the process of figuring out how to stack it when you have all those different
Yeah,
sources of information?
I think it's about viewing lenses. I think coaches, their viewing lens is going to be shaded by technique, responsibility, because those are things they're really great at. And scouts are going to be more about natural ability, what's in your body. And analytics people, myself, are going to be about outcomes. Like, hey, how many times is this happening? What percentage of times? And ultimately, there is value to all of those things. And I wouldn't want anybody to become the other, right? I want everybody to be great in their own sense. So I wouldn't say it's putting more weight on the other. It's using them all equally and then closing the loop when they don't agree. Well, if one person who says outcomes sees it different than the person who sees ability, well, let's figure that out. And so ultimately, that's what we try and do, and just close the loop and ultimately figure out a good answer to decide where we want to be.
Time for a couple more.
Kwesi, how important has this time been for you as your first draft to sort of set the culture for your front office and how you want it to be?
It's been important. It's been probably my favorite part of what's been going on. You sit, everybody, you daydream when when I was in San Francisco and I'm sitting in office, long hours, and what would it be like when I got here, and what would we dress like? How would we start meetings? We play our morning song to get going, and we all these things that we do and you dream about, and they're here and they're happening, and it's been special to be a part of, and I'm so happy that everybody here has responded positively to it. But again, the culture is important. That's not just the culture of the personnel, but it's the culture that Kevin's building with the players and all of it. And it's been great. We like where we are. We like what we're building. By no means do we feel like we've done anything. We just got started, but we're excited about where we're going.
You mentioned the long hours. How many hours are you putting in? Are you here till midnight every night or in your first draft?
You do whatever it takes to get your job done. I talked about my mom and my initial preference. My dad, when they came to this country, my dad was a dental school and he's driving a cab, and my mom worked multiple jobs. One of my closest childhood friends, a transplant surgeon who I want to say doesn't sleep for 2 days and then goes and operates on somebody. So I'm not going to be ever the one standing up here telling you how many hours I work doing something like this. It's just a privilege.
And what's the morning song?
We got it. Actually, I just texted Rob and Kevin for the one today. Our yesterday was Grinding by the Clips. Pusha T just came out with a new album, so I felt like bringing him back in style.